For 3 years, Matthew, a simple man living in a small coastal town in Maine, raised a boy he had found all alone, wrapped in a blanket next to a church. He gave him his last name, his bread, and his love, never imagining that that child was no orphan, but the lost son of a woman whose life seemed untouchable. A millionaire businesswoman, famous for her coldness and her power. But one afternoon, as the sun was setting over the ocean and the boy was playing with a kite, a black SUV pulled up in front of Matthew's house. Out stepped a woman with eyes red from crying. Her words left him paralyzed. "He's my son." Nothing would ever be the same from that day on. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment what you would do in Matthew's shoes. Your opinion could change the course of the story. Dawn in Sunset Bay always arrived accompanied by the cry of seagulls and the smell of fresh-baked bread. Matthew, with his hands covered in flour and his flannel shirt half open from the heat of the oven, was getting ready for another day in his little bakery. That place was his whole world. Well, almost everything. For 3 years now, he'd shared it with Liam, a boy with huge, curious eyes who had changed his life in a way he still couldn't fully explain. Matthew had found him one early morning, wrapped in a gray blanket in front of the church doors. At first, he thought someone had left him there for the pastor to find. But nobody came back. Not the next day, not the one after that, not ever. That was when Matthew, without thinking too much about it, decided to take him in. He gave him his name, his home, and his routine. Liam grew up amidst the aroma of sweet bread and the sound of the waves crashing on the rocky shore. Sometimes, while the boy kneaded little balls of dough, he'd say with a smile, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to make bread just like you." Matthew could only watch him with tenderness, feeling a lump in his throat. He never dared to tell him he wasn't his real father. Not because he wanted to lie to him, but because he was terrified of losing him. The whole town knew them. Everyone talked about that single father who had raised the boy with more love than many could imagine. On Sundays, when they went to church, people greeted them warmly. Matthew didn't have much money, but he had a peace he'd never known before. However, something began to change one autumn afternoon. Matthew noticed that for a few days, a dark SUV had been stopping in front of his bakery. It wasn't common to see luxury vehicles in Sunset Bay, much less with tinted windows. At first, he didn't pay it much mind, but the car kept appearing, always the same one, always in silence. One morning, upon opening the shop, he found an envelope under the door. Inside, there was only a photograph. Liam playing on the beach. The picture had been taken from a distance. Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. He put the photo in his pocket and tried to go on with his day as normal. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. That night, while the boy was sleeping, he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in his hands. The sound of the ocean wasn't enough to calm the unease growing inside him. "What if someone is looking for him?" he whispered, looking up at the sky. The next morning, he decided to talk to the pastor. Pastor Julian listened to him intently, and after a few seconds of silence told him in a voice so soft, "Matthew, if that boy has a past, sooner or later it will come looking for him. Don't take this as a threat, but rather as a possibility. Sometimes loving also means knowing when to let go." Those words haunted him all day. He didn't want to think about losing Liam. He just couldn't. But fate, as fickle as the wind, had already begun to move. That very afternoon, as the sun began to set, Liam was playing on the beach with a blue kite. Matthew watched him from afar, laughing as he saw him running barefoot across the sand. That was when he heard the sound of an engine. A black SUV pulled up in front of his house. An elegant woman in her 30s got out, her eyes red and her breathing ragged. Her tailored suit stood in stark contrast to the dust of the road. She walked slowly toward Matthew, clutching a gold chain in her hand. A small initial was engraved on the pendant, L. "Are you Matthew Rivera?" she asked, trembling. "Yes, I know who you are." The woman took a deep breath, and with a broken voice, she said the words he would never forget. "That boy, the one on the beach, is my son." Matthew's world stopped. For a moment, the ocean fell silent. There was only that woman's face, and the voice that had struck him like a lightning bolt. Liam kept running, oblivious to everything, happy, free. and he, the man who had raised him, felt the air escape his chest. He didn't know what to say or feel. He only understood that from that moment on, his life no longer belonged just to him. The sunset grew heavy, as if the air itself refused to move. Matthew couldn't find the words. The woman in front of him was trembling, the chain squeezed tight in her hand, tears rolling down her cheeks. Behind them, the ocean kept, roaring calmly, unaware of the storm that had just been born between them. "Your son," Matthew repeated, his voice barely a whisper. She nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking. "His name is Liam. He disappeared 3 years ago. He was 2 when I lost him, when he was kidnapped." That last word hung suspended in the air. Matthew took a step back, unable to comprehend. He looked toward the beach, where Liam, or Liam, as she called him, was still laughing, running after his blue kite. It was impossible to link that scene with a story of loss and despair. "There must be some mistake," Matthew said, his heart racing. "I found him at the church door. No one came looking for him. I took him with me because he was all alone." The woman listened in silence. She had the look of someone who had seen too much pain. "I know Matthew," she said, using his name as if she had already investigated him. "I've looked for years for the man who had him, but I never believed it would be someone like you." "Someone like me?" he asked, confused. "Someone good," she answered, and her eyes filled with tears again. "You don't know how much I prayed that my son would be in the hands of someone good." In that instant, Matthew didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. His whole body was shaking. He had imagined 1,000 times what he would do if the boy's family appeared. But he never thought that it would be a woman so different. From his world, a millionaire, a figure known on the news, with companies and properties, who was now there on her knees in front of his bakery, begging for her son. "I need to see him," she said with a trembling voice. I just want to hold him." Matthew nodded, not knowing how to refuse. He walked with her toward the shore. Liam looked up when he saw them coming and ran toward him, shouting, "Dad, look! The kite's going higher now!" The woman stopped. That word "Dad" pierced right through her soul. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back a sob. When the boy stopped in front of them, he watched her curiously. "Who is she, Dad?" Liam asked, clinging to his leg. Matthew crouched down, searching for words that wouldn't hurt anyone. "She's a friend, son. Your friend or mine?" Matthew smiled sadly. "Maybe both of ours." The woman knelt down too, getting to the child's eye level. Her eyes were shining, her voice trembling. "Hi there, little one," she said softly. "What's your name?" "Liam," the boy answered without letting go of Matthew's hand. "That's a beautiful name," she whispered with a broken smile. "It was my son's name." The boy nodded, not understanding. He looked at Matthew as if searching for approval, and he just stroked his hair. The woman stood up slowly and stepped back a few paces. She pulled a small photo from her pocket, a baby with chubby cheeks and the same blue kite. Matthew looked at her, unable to speak. "He was mine," she said. "That kite was the only thing left in his room." Silence fell like a wave. The boy was running on the sand again, and the sky was turning orange. Matthew felt his heart breaking into 2 identical halves, one that wanted to protect Liam at all costs, and another that knew this child had a right to know his truth. When night fell, the woman said goodbye with a promise. "I'll come back tomorrow with documents, with proof. I don't want to take anything from you, Matthew. I just need to know the truth." And then she left. The black SUV disappeared down the road. Matthew stayed silent for a long while, watching the distant lights fade. Liam was already sleeping with the kite in his arms. In the dim light, he understood that love, no matter how pure, wasn't always enough to stop the truth. As he closed the window, he murmured to himself, "What if he really is her son? Could I let him go after all this time?" But the ocean didn't answer. It only brought the constant sound of waves and the echo of a painful certainty. The next day would change their lives forever. By the next morning, the sunrise didn't bring its usual calm. Matthew woke before the sun, his thoughts jumbled and his heart heavy. While he prepared the bread, his hands moved on their own, mechanically, as if he were kneading without a soul. The flour stuck to his fingers, but what weighed him down wasn't the dough. It was the uncertainty. Liam was still asleep, hugging his blue kite. The same one that, according to that woman, had belonged to her lost son. Liam She had said that very name. The coincidences were too many. Matthew knew it, even if he wanted to deny it. When the boy woke up, he ran to hug him. "Dad, I dreamed we were flying with the kite high above the sea." His eyes shone with joy. Matthew smiled tenderly, but deep down he felt a pang of pain. He didn't know how to explain that his world could crumble at any moment. The bakery opened just like every other day, even though the news had spread through the town. Some customers whispered as they came in, casting curious glances. Others just patted him on the shoulder, not daring to ask. Matthew tried to keep calm, but inside, he was falling apart. By mid-morning, the black SUV returned. Matthew watched the vehicle stop in front of his door, and this time he didn't feel fear, but a mix of resignation and sadness. The woman got out of the car, dressed simply, wearing no makeup, her face tired from crying. She was carrying a thick folder in her hands. "Good morning, Matthew," she said in a soft voice. "Good morning, ma'am," he replied, not knowing if he should look her in the eye. "Please, call me Claire." They went into the bakery. Liam was in the back room painting drawings on empty boxes. Claire sat down across from Matthew and placed the documents on the wooden table. "Everything is here," she said, opening the folder. "My son's birth certificate, the police report from his disappearance, and the chain he was wearing around his neck when I lost him." Matthew looked at the gold chain. It was the same one she had shown him the day before with the letter L. But what really shook him was something else. A photograph of little Liam at 2 years old. He had Liam's same smile, the same eyes, even the same little scar above his eyebrow. "It can't be," whispered Matthew. "It is," she replied, her voice barely a thread. "We did a DNA test a week ago. We got a sample from his toothbrush, thanks to a contact at the local hospital." Claire looked at him cautiously, trying not to hurt him. "Matthew, he is my son. There is no doubt." Silence fell between them like a stone. Outside, the sound of the ocean remained the same, but inside the bakery, everything had stopped. Matthew lowered his gaze. He had wished that this wasn't true, but now that it was, the pain was deeper than he had imagined. "I don't want to hurt you," Claire continued. "I owe you everything. You saved him, you raised him, you made him happy. You can't imagine how much that means to me. But I also need to have him with me, not as a possession, but as a mother who has lived through 3 years of emptiness." Matthew took a deep breath. "I'm not his biological father, Claire. I know, but I also know what it's like to watch him get sick, to comfort him when he's scared, to listen to him laugh. I can't just hand him over like he's something I borrowed." Claire lowered her head. "I'm not taking him away from you, Matthew. I want you to keep being part of his life. I don't want to erase you from his story, but I need to tell him the truth." Matthew stared at the steam, rising from the oven, floating in the air like a sigh. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Let me tell him myself." "I don't want him to hear it from a stranger." Claire nodded. "Of course." That night, when Liam was already in his bed, Matthew sat down beside him. The boy was playing with the gold chain he had found on the table. "Dad, can I keep this?" "It has my letter on it." Matthew felt his soul shatter. "Yes, son, but there's something I need to tell you." The boy looked at him seriously with those clear eyes that understood everything without words. "What's wrong?" "You see, there's a lady who came to see you. Her name is Claire. She's been looking for you for a long time. She says she is your mom." Liam watched him in silence, not fully understanding. "My mom," he repeated, surprised. "But you are my dad." Matthew swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "And I always will be. But there's a part of you that belongs to her too." The boy didn't answer. He hugged him tight, so tight that Matthew felt time stop. In that hug were 3 years of love, of fears, of nights without sleep. When Liam fell asleep, Matthew looked at him one last time before turning off the light. He knew that the next day he would have to face the hardest decision of his life. The sunrise the following morning felt different. There was no seagull cry or smell of fresh-baked bread, just a heavy silence. The kind of silence that announces something you don't want to face. Matthew got dressed without looking in the mirror and walked over to the window. The ocean was still there, calm, as if nothing were happening. But inside his chest, everything was a storm. Liam was still asleep, hugging his blue kite. That kite, a witness to the last few years, seemed to float between 2 worlds. The world of the father who had raised him, and the world of the mother who had just reappeared. Matthew knew that this day would mark a turning point, even though he didn't want to admit it. Mid-morning, the black SUV pulled up in front of the bakery again. Claire got out slowly, dressed simply, but with her eyes full of held-back tears. She was carrying a small suitcase in her hand, and behind her was an assistant with a white envelope. Everything was discreet, but charged with a tension you could feel from a distance. Matthew went out to meet her. "Good morning," he said, his voice dull. "Good morning, Matthew. May I come in?" Of course. The three of them went inside. The smell of fresh bread still filled the place, even though the oven was off. Claire set the suitcase aside and looked around with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "He grew up here," she whispered. "Here is where he learned to smile again." Matthew didn't answer. He couldn't. He felt that any word would break the delicate balance of that moment. Liam came running out from the back room with his usual energy. "Mama Claire!" he said with a naturalness that surprised everyone. Claire crouched down immediately, hugging him with an emotion she couldn't contain. "I missed you so much, my love," she murmured, stroking his hair. "You have no idea how much I dreamed of seeing you again." The boy stood still, looking at her with curiosity. "Are you going to stay here?" he asked. She looked at him, not knowing what to say. "I'd like to, but first we have to talk to your dad." Matthew watched them from the doorway, feeling like he was running out of air. When Claire stood up, she walked over to him. "Matthew, I don't want this to be a battle," she said softly. "I don't want courts or lawyers or pain. I just want to do the right thing." He nodded without looking at her. "The right thing." He repeated it, as if testing the weight of those words. "And what is the right thing when your heart refuses to obey?" Claire didn't answer. She just held out the white envelope. "Inside are the custody papers. I don't want to take him away from you, Matthew. I want to share custody with you. We can make it legal. He loves you, and I love him too. I can't erase you from his life." Matthew took it, but didn't open it. "And what if he doesn't want to leave?" he asked. "Then we won't force him," she answered without hesitation. "I want this to be a choice, not a loss." Liam was watching them from the table, playing with the gold chain. "Dad, are you guys sad?" Matthew took a deep breath and walked over. He knelt down in front of the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No, son, we're trying to do something important. Something so that we can all be happy." The boy frowned. "Does that mean I won't see you anymore?" Matthew felt his heart break, but he smiled. "No, Liam, I'll always be here. Even if you live somewhere else, even if the ocean is far away, you'll always have a home to come back to." Liam lowered his head. "I want to go with you, but I also want to get to know her." His voice was trembling. "I can have 2 homes." Claire came closer, her eyes shining. "Of course you can, my love. You can have 2 homes, 2 families, and double the love." The boy smiled weakly. Matthew smiled too, even though inside him there was an emptiness impossible to fill. Hours passed between papers, conversations, and long silences. By the late afternoon, Claire got ready to leave. Liam was carrying a small backpack, his blue kite, and the gold chain hanging from his neck. Before getting in the car, he ran toward Matthew and hugged him with all his might. "I'm gonna miss you, Dad." Matthew closed his eyes, holding him as if time were standing still. "And I'll miss you, son. But no matter where you are, you're always going to be my little baker." Liam laughed, though his eyes were misty. Then he got in the car, and Claire gave Matthew one last look. "Thank you for loving him when I couldn't," she said, before closing the door. The SUV started slowly, driving away down the dirt road. Matthew stood there watching as they faded into the evening mist. When he couldn't see them anymore, he turned around and went into the empty bakery. He turned on the oven, even though he didn't have anything to bake. He just wanted to hear the crackle of the fire. That sound that had kept him company all those years. And while the warmth filled the place, he whispered to the air, "True love doesn't always hold on tight. Sometimes, it just teaches you to let go." Outside, the ocean kept crashing against the rocks, and even though the town was sleeping, a part of Matthew knew that not everything was lost, because the love he had given didn't end with a goodbye. The following days passed slowly, as if the town clock had stopped. The bakery was still open. The ocean kept roaring just the same, but for Matthew, nothing had the same color. Every corner of the shop reminded him of Liam, his laugh mixed with the noise of the mixer, his voice asking if the bread was ready yet, his blue kite hanging on the wall. At night, Matthew didn't sleep much. Sometimes he would lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering if Liam had already gotten used to his new house, if he was sleeping well, or if he asked about him before going to bed. Not even a week had passed, but the boy's absence weighed more than any burden he had ever known in his life. The town, supportive as always, tried to comfort him. Neighbors stopped by the bakery with excuses, buying bread, chatting a bit, keeping him company in silence. But nothing filled that void. One afternoon, when the sky was turning gray, the mailman arrived with a thick paper envelope. It didn't have an official stamp, just his name written in childish handwriting. For my dad, Matthew. His heart skipped a beat. He opened the envelope with trembling hands, and inside he found a letter written in pencil, full of smudges and drawings. Dear Dad, Mom Claire brought me to a very big house in Boston. There's a garden with flowers and a room just for me. She is very nice. She reads me stories before sleeping and lets me make bread with her, even though she doesn't know much. But sometimes I cry a little because I miss the smell of the oven and the seagulls at the window. Mom says that soon we'll go visit you. I told her I want to help you knead bread again. I'm sending you a drawing. It's you, me, and her. The three of us together with the blue kite. I love you so much, Liam. Matthew stared at the paper for a long time. The crooked letters, the scribbles, the pencil smudges, all of that was more real than any legal document. It was his son speaking to him from another world. He cried in silence, completely unashamed. He wept like someone finally letting go of a weight they've been carrying for too long. Then he carefully folded the letter and tucked it away in a drawer, right next to the very first photo taken of them together. Days kept passing, and little by little, the sadness settled into something quieter. Matthew went back to baking bread every morning. He went back to chatting with customers, back to opening the windows to let the scent of the ocean drift in. But none of it could wash away the longing. Until one Saturday afternoon, while he was closing up the bakery, he heard a familiar voice behind him. Do you still make those sweet cinnamon rolls? Matthew spun around, and there was Claire, smiling shyly. Beside her, Liam came running toward him with open arms. Dad, look! I brought my kite! The boy hugged him with the same strength as always, as if no time had passed at all. Matthew scooped him up, laughing through his tears. You've grown, my little baker. Claire watched them, overcome with emotion. I told you we'd come, she said. He hasn't stopped talking about you for a single day. Matthew nodded, unable to hide how moved he was. And I haven't stopped waiting for him. They spent the afternoon together. Liam helped Matthew knead the dough, laughing when the flour covered his hands. Claire watched from the doorway with that mix of tenderness and peace that only mothers have when they see their child happy. When the bread came out of the oven, the three of them sat down to eat it warm, just like they used to. Liam looked at them and said, with the natural ease of someone who understands more than they let on, Can we do this more often? Claire smiled. Yes, my love. We can do it as often as we want. Matthew looked at her, and in the silence he understood what she had realized too. He hadn't lost a son, and she hadn't just recovered one. They were sharing him in a new way, honest and full of love. As the sun began to set, Claire and Liam got ready to leave. But this time there were no tears, only promises. We'll see you next weekend, she said. And I'll bring more letters, Liam added, laughing. The SUV drove off slowly, kicking up a cloud of dust that glowed gold in the sunlight. Matthew stood watching until they disappeared, wearing a calm smile. For the first time in months, he felt peace. That night, as he was closing up the bakery, he lit a candle next to the drawing Liam had sent him. 3 figures and a blue kite floating in the sky. He whispered to himself, his heart full. Family isn't always chosen by blood. Sometimes it's needed with love. Almost a year had passed since that afternoon when Liam and Claire came back for the first time. Since then, the visits had become a habit. Every 2 weekends, the black SUV would arrive in town, but it no longer brought sadness. It brought laughter, flour in the air, and the smell of fresh bread. Liam was growing fast. He could already read almost without making mistakes, and he'd learned to knead with both hands. Like a real baker, he'd say with pride. When he arrived at the bakery, he'd take off his shoes, run into the kitchen, and shout, "Dad, the oven is ready. Today I want to make heart-shaped sweetbread." Matthew was always smiling. That little boy had become his biggest reason to keep going, and even though he didn't sleep under his roof anymore, he still filled every corner of his life with light. Claire had changed too. Her elegance was still there, but she'd learned to enjoy the simple things. You'd often see her with her sleeves rolled up, helping clean the counter or laughing with the town neighbors. People had stopped seeing her as just the millionaire and started treating her like one of their own. One summer afternoon, the three of them sat facing the ocean, watching the sun slowly sink into the horizon. Liam held the blue kite in his hands, the same one that had brought their destinies together years ago. "You know, Dad," the boy said as the wind ruffled his hair, "Mom says that when the wind is strong, the kite flies higher." Matthew looked at him with that calm only found in men, who've learned how to let go without losing themselves. "And she's right, son. Sometimes when life blows hard, all we can do is learn to fly higher." Claire watched them in silence. There was something about the way Matthew spoke that always moved her. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper. Respect. Genuine affection. A connection impossible to define with words. "Have you noticed?" she said, smiling. "This boy has the best of both of us." "Yeah," Matthew replied, looking at her. "Your strength, and my flower-covered hands." The three of them laughed. Time seemed to have stood still, but destiny, faithful to its nature, started moving again. One morning, Claire came to the bakery with a proposal. "Matthew, I want to open a new bakery in Boston," she said, with a mix of excitement and nerves. "I want you to run it. I want it to be yours just as much as it is mine." He looked at her in surprise. "Me? But my life is here, Claire. The ocean, the people, the church, everything I am is in this town." "I know," she replied. "But think about what you could teach Liam. He looks up to you more than you imagine. If you came, the three of us would be closer together." Matthew stayed silent. The idea was tempting, but it also scared him. He had built his world with such effort, brick by brick, loaf by loaf. Could he leave it all again? He spent days thinking about it. He walked along the seashore, listening to the sound of the waves, searching for an answer. He remembered the words of Pastor Julian, the old parish pastor. "Sometimes, loving is knowing when to let go, but also knowing when to start over." One night, he made a decision. When Claire and Liam returned the following weekend, Matthew was waiting for them with a different kind of smile. There was a look of relief in his eyes. "I've decided to accept," he said. "I'll go to the city, but on one condition." Claire looked at him expectantly. "What is it?" "That the name of the place is Bread of the Sea, so we never forget where we came from." Claire smiled, moved. "Done." Liam jumped for joy. "Dad, we're going to have two bakeries, one by the ocean and one in the city." And so it was. A few months later, Matthew moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of Boston. Every morning, he opened his new shop with the same ritual, lighting the oven, looking at the photo of Liam and Claire, and giving silent thanks. The bakery soon filled with people, not just for the taste of the bread, but for the warmth you could feel inside. There was something different, something you couldn't fake. The genuine love that had shaped that story. Sometimes when Liam got out of school, he'd run straight to the shop and throw on his white apron. "Dad, want to help with the cinnamon hearts?" he'd say, laughing. Matthew would give him a wink. "You bet, little baker, but this time you get to decide how much love goes into the dough." And as the smell of fresh bread mixed with the city noise, Claire watched them from the doorway, knowing deep down that after all that pain, they'd found something stronger than blood. A family built on love, forgiveness, and second chances. That night, while locking up to the shop, Matthew looked out the window. The city was sleeping, but in his heart, he could still hear the sound of the ocean. And he finally realized that home wasn't a place. It was the people you choose to love. A few years had passed since that fresh start. The Bread of the Sea had become more than just a bakery. It was a gathering spot, a warm refuge in the middle of all that city noise. Every morning, the smell of freshly baked bread mixed with the voices of the regulars, the laughter of children, and the soft music always playing in the background. Matthew, with a bit of gray in his hair now and his apron spotless as always, kept kneading dough with the same dedication as ever, but now he wasn't alone. Liam, who was basically a teenager, now at 13, worked right beside him, focused, mirroring his every move. "Dad," he said one afternoon while shaping a round loaf, "remember when you first taught me how to make bread?" Matthew smiled. "Of course I do. It was back at the old oven in the town. You got so covered in flour it looked like it had snowed inside the bakery." Liam laughed. "And you told me the bread wouldn't turn out right unless you made it with love." "Do I still believe that, son?" Matthew replied. "Anything you make with love, even if it's not perfect, is what truly feeds the soul." Claire walked in just then, dressed simply, with a bag of flour tucked under her arm. She'd stepped back from many of her business ventures to focus more on what truly made her happy. Every afternoon she stopped by the bakery, not just to see them, but to be part of this place that was born from the most unlikely meeting of her life. "The oven's ready," she said with a smile, "and I think we should make something special today." "Why?" Liam asked. "Because today makes it exactly 5 years since we opened the Bread of the Sea." The three of them looked at each other and laughed. No other explanation was needed. They spent hours kneading dough together, taking their time, sharing stories and laughs. Outside, the city kept up its busy pace. But inside the shop, time seemed to stand still. When the last loaf came out of the oven, Liam lifted it carefully. It was round, golden, perfect. "This one's called the family bread," he said proudly. That night, when they closed up the shop, they didn't leave right away. Claire lit a small candle on the counter, and the three of them sat there watching it. It was their way of saying thank you. Not to any specific god, but to life, to destiny, or maybe just for finding something so human and real amidst all that pain. Matthew looked at them tenderly. He remembered the first time he saw Liam wrapped in that gray blanket. He remembered his fear, his uncertainty, and everything he'd learned since then. "You know, Liam," he said softly, "when I found you, I thought life was just lending you to me for a little while. But now I realize, you were a gift meant to last forever." Claire took his hand. "And you were the miracle my son needed," he replied with gratitude. "Thank you for not giving up." Liam hugged them both. "I just know I love you guys," he said, with that honesty only kids really have. "And that this bakery is always going to be our home, no matter where we live." The clock struck 9. Outside, night was falling peacefully. The neon sign, the Bread of the Sea, flickered softly, reflecting its light on the wet sidewalk. Matthew walked over to the door, pulled down the shutters, and took a deep breath. The scent of fresh-baked bread still lingered in the air, mingled with Liam's laughter and Claire's voice chatting in the kitchen. For the first time in years, he didn't feel nostalgia or emptiness, just a deep peace, the kind that comes when you understand that love doesn't need explanations, just presence. That night, before going to sleep, Matthew opened an old wooden box he kept in his room. Inside was the gray blanket he'd found Liam in, and the letter the boy had written him years ago. He touched them gently, as if they were treasures. Then he put them back, closed the box, and smiled. Because he knew the story didn't end there. It would go on, every time they kneaded dough together, every time a customer smiled, when tasting their bread, every time the blue kite flew in the sky again. And as he turned out the last light, he whispered, "Real love doesn't end. It just changes shape, like bread born from fire, but living on in those who share it." Yeah, as the years rolled on, Matthew and Claire grew even closer, eventually marrying in a quiet ceremony by the ocean, blending their worlds into one unbreakable bond. Liam, now thriving in high school, started a baking club, inspiring other kids with stories of resilience and family. The bakery expanded into a small chain, each location carrying a piece of Sunset Bay's charm, complete with ocean-themed decor and recipes passed down like heirlooms. Through it all, they hosted annual kite-flying festivals, turning their personal symbol of hope into a community tradition that reminded everyone, sometimes the greatest treasures wash up on shore when you least expect them.